Hello everyone, today we are starting a new series about all the women that are currently on death row in the US. Let's dive into it. Patricia Blackmon, 20 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Blackmon was found guilty of her adopted daughter's death. Dominiqua Bryant was just 2 years old. Patricia Blackmon called emergency 911 on May 29, 1999 to request paramedics be sent to her trailer in Dothan. She reported that her child was not breathing to the 911 operator. Eddie Smith, a paramedic in Dothan, testified that when he got to Patricia Blackmon's mobile home at around 9:30 p.m., he saw Dominiqua unresponsive and lying on the floor of the main bedroom. She was only wearing a diaper and blood-soaked socks. Her chest was covered in blood and she had a hematoma on her forehead. She was taken to Flowers Hospital emergency room after the paramedics tried to revive her. According to the evidence, Patricia adopted Dominiqua about 9 months prior to her death. The father-in-law of Blackmon, Wayne Johnson, testified that he saw Dominiqua playing and acting normally the night of her murder. He claimed that the little girl and Patricia left his home at around 8 p.m. Many objects found in Patricia Blackmon's mobile home were covered in blood. A bloodstain was found on a broken pool cue. They also found a child's t-shirt, a pink flat bed sheet, a comforter, and 2 napkins, according to the forensic testing. Tierra Capri Gobble, 17 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Gobble was found guilty of the death of her 4-month-old son, Phoenix Cody Parrish. Tierra Capri Gobble's first 3 children were allegedly taken from her by child services due to abuse, and her 4th kid was delivered to family members with the direction that Gobble be denied access. Well, the parents gave Tierra permission to take the baby, and when the child was just 4 months old, she beat him to death. Phoenix was brought to the emergency room of the Southeast Alabama Medical Center in Dothan on December 15, 2004. He had no pulse and was not breathing. When efforts to revive him were in vain, he was declared dead not long after being taken to the hospital. Phoenix's skull had been broken, and the autopsy revealed that he had died as a result of blood head trauma. He also had several bruises on his face, head, neck, and chest, fractured ribs, a broken arm, fractures in both wrists, and a rip in the inside of his lips, consistent with a bottle being rammed into his mouth. The baby died because his mother could not get him to sleep and she lost her temper. Lisa Leanne Graham, 7 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Lisa Graham was found guilty of hiring a family friend to kill her daughter Stephanie Shea Graham, who was 21 years old. According to the prosecution, Graham detested her daughter because she was a addict, a stripper, and likely a prostitute, and had left college. The fact that Shea and her husband often sided with the same position in disputes, which was tearing their marriage apart, led Graham to suspect that the two were having an affair. Stephanie was also charged with aggravated assault in connection with a drive-by shooting in 2007, and Graham was concerned that she might leave the country and avoid having to post a $100,000 bond. Graham contacted Walton, who is currently serving a life sentence after confessing to the murder, on July 7 and gave him her weapon. Shea was found by Walton at a gas station with some companions. Under the guise of providing her a ride out of state, he convinced her to get into his truck. After that, he took Shea to a rural road off of Highway 165, where she exited the vehicle to use the restroom. She was kneeling next to the truck when Walton pulled out a 9mm pistol and fired 6 shots, twice striking her in the head, leaving her body covered in bullets with her clothes still around her ankles. Heather Leavell Keaton, 7 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Leavell Keaton was charged and convicted for the murder of her 2 stepchildren, 3-year-old Chase DeBlas and 4-year-old Natalie DeBlas in 2010. She committed these crimes together with her partner John DeBlas, who was the father of the kids. Prosecutors claim that Natalie was duct taped, put in a suitcase, and left in a closet for 12 hours before she choked to death in March 2010. Later, her body was discarded close to Citronelle in a wooded area. Chase was strapped to a broom handle and left in the corner of the couple's bedroom overnight in June 2010, where he suffocated to death. His body was discovered in the woods. According to the prosecution, Level Keaton was envious of Natalie and reacted angrily when Natalie was referred to as a princess by friends and relatives. When Chase asked about his little sister, he was murdered as well. Christy Michelle Scott, 14 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Scott allegedly set her house on fire, killing her son, an autistic 6 years old, according to court records. Fire investigators concluded that her children's bedroom was where the deadly fire started. Scott may have been attempting to make a claim under the insurance coverage. The Scott home was set on fire in the early hours of August 16, 2008, and Mason perished as a result of this fire. He died from smoke in his airway and thermal burns, according to a pathologist with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences named Dr. Emily Ward. Christy Michelle Scott and her 4-year-old son Noah were sleeping in Jeremy Scott's room. He is the husband of Christy and he had been away out of town for a few weeks. Mason was sleeping alone in the boys' bedroom. Samantha Allen, 5 years on death row in the state of Arizona. Police were called to Amy Deal's residence on July 12, 2011, where they discovered the girl dead from suffocation inside a small footlocker. Amy had been residing with her aunt and legal guardian, Cynthia Stoltzman, 44 years old, as well as her grandmother, Judith Deal. Cynthia's daughter and son-in-law were living in the same house. Samantha and John Allen. They were both 23 years old. That was not all, however. There were another 12 children living under the same roof. Since Amy was discovered to be very unclean and had bruises on her left leg from being forced into the trunk, the police suspected foul play. The family initially told the police that the night before, after the adults had gone to sleep, Amy was playing hide and seek and locked herself in the trunk. They all insisted that Amy was discovered dead the following day inside the trunk. However, Samantha and John Allen admitted to locking Amy in the trunk as punishment after being questioned about it. Amy had taken a popsicle without permission, and she was reportedly constantly hungry. Amy was only 11 years old. Wendy Andriano, 18 years on death row in the state of Arizona. The husband of Wendy Andriano had to stop working after developing a terrible illness. Wendy allegedly started frequenting bars and having extramarital affairs because she felt resentful of her obligations. She devised a plan to murder her spouse and make money from his passing as her unhappiness grew. In order to get a life insurance policy, she recruited her pals to pretend to be her spouse. She conducted studies on various poisons' effects and covered ways to obtain them. Andriano placed a poison order and had it delivered to a different company. Despite Andriano's claims that her husband mistreated her physically and mentally, none of her acquaintances have ever seen any evidence of it. Andriano started sneaking her husband tablets of sodium azide. On October 8, 2000, Andriano called 911 in the early morning to report that her husband was experiencing a heart attack, but when paramedics arrived, she turned them away. She contacted 911 once more after a few hours later to claim that she had beaten and stabbed him in self-defense. When emergency personnel came, they discovered Joe Andriano dead from multiple beatings and a neck stab wound. He was too weak from the chemotherapy and poisons to fight off Andriano, who hit him at least 20 times with a bar stool before stabbing him in the neck. Shauna Ford, 12 years on death row in the state of Arizona. By posing as law enforcement agents searching for fugitives, Shauna Ford and her companions were able to access the Flores residence. The suspects anticipated finding cash and drugs to be used to pay for Ford's Minuteman American Defense, MAD, a vigilante nativist organization that patrolled Arizona's border with Mexico. When they didn't find any drugs, the invaders seized some cheap jewelry and shot Raul Flores Jr., 29 years old, and his daughter, Brisenia Iliana Flores, 9 years old. They did not survive the attack. After being shot 3 times, Gina Gonzalez played dead and managed to escape. She was Raul's wife and Brisenia's mother. The 2 men that participated in the attack were also charged. Jason Bush received the death penalty, while Albert Gaxiola received a life sentence without parole. Rosie Alfaro, 30 years on death row in the state of California. On July 14, 1992, Alfaro received a death sentence for the murder of a 9-year-old girl who was a victim of a June 15, 1990 robbery and break-in in Anaheim, California. The 9-year-old was stabbed 57 times by Alfaro, who was just 18 at the time of the crime, and she was expecting twins. The victim, Autumn Wallace, gave Alfaro permission to enter the house because she recognized her as a frequent visitor and a friend of her older sister. Alfaro arrived and requested permission to use the restroom inside, while Autumn was home alone waiting for her sister and mother to get home from work. Alfaro had not anticipated finding someone at the Wallace home when she had planned to approach it. When she did, she understood that she had to get rid of Autumn since she would have known who had broken into the house. Alfaro stabbed Autumn 57 times before stealing anything that appeared to be valuable. Autumn's mother, Linda Wallace, discovered her daughter's body in the bathroom many hours later. Socorro Caro, 20 years on death row in the state of California. Joey, 11 years old, Michael, 8 years old, and Christopher, 5 years old, were shot dead at their Camarillo home. The author of the crimes was none other than their mother, Socorro Caro, who felt like this was a good way to get revenge on her husband who was planning to leave her. Her 1-year-old fourth child was uninjured. Caro also shot herself in the head, but she made a full recovery. During her trial, evidence was presented that her husband wanted a divorce because she was the abuser in their relationship, often turning to violence when arguing. She said she did not remember absolutely anything from the night of the crimes, which could be true considering she had brain surgery after the incident. She also tried to say that her husband was the one who committed the murders, but she could not prove this in court and later pled guilty by reasons of insanity. Hello everyone, today's video is a part 2 of all the women that are currently on death row in the US. Let's start with Celeste Carrington, 28 years on death row in the state of California. Victor Esparza, a 34-year-old janitor at a shoe factory in San Carlos, and Caroline Gleason, a 36-year-old property manager at a real estate agency in Palo Alto, both died after being shot by Carrington in separate robberies 2 months apart, according to authorities. She shot and injured Redwood City pediatrician Alan Marks during a heist in his office 5 days after killing Gleason. Carrington was fired from her work as a janitor in December 1991 for stealing checks, despite the fact that she had no prior criminal history at the time of the murders. According to defense testimony, Carrington was raised in a poor household in Philadelphia, subjected to parental abuse, and became pregnant at the age of 14 by her father. After graduating, she competed internationally in the shot put while starring in track and field at a community college in Southern California. Cynthia Coffman, 33 years on death row in the state of California. Coffman was found guilty of 5 murders and has spent the last 2 decades on California's execution row. According to court records, she and her partner James Marlowe committed multiple crimes across several states, leaving a trail of dead bodies in their wake. Coffman did confess to killing 4 people to the police and ultimately to the jury, but she argued that James Marlowe's power over her was what caused these horrific deeds. She was found guilty of committing another murder in a 1992 trial, and as a result, she was also given a life sentence. She was born in Missouri, St. Louis. She was raised by her mother after her father abandoned the family. At one time, Kaufman's mother tried to give her and her brothers away. She got married at age 18 and gave birth to a child, but the union did not last. With a friend, she relocated to Arizona, where she later met Marlowe soon after he was released from prison. Kerry Lyn Dalton, 27 years on death row in the state of California. Irene Melanie May was tortured and killed in 1988 in San Diego County, California by Dalton, who believed May had stolen her jewelry. She was accused of using a cast iron frying pan, a knife, and a syringe filled with battery acid to commit a torture murder with 3 other people: Mark Lee Tompkins, Cheryl Ann Baker, and another guy only known as George. The trial and the conviction have been the subject of many discussions regarding the legitimacy of the charges, since a body has never been found and there is no actual record of Dalton confessing to the crime. The prosecution has been accused of presenting hearsay as plain evidence to the jury. Dalton remains on death row for the time being, and her sister is fighting to change this. Susan Eubanks, 26 years on death row in the state of California. Eubanks killed her 4 sons: Brandon, 14 years old, Austin, 7 years old, Brigham, 6 years old, and Matthew, 4 years old, on October 26, 1999. All of the boys were shot in the head, and she then shot herself in the stomach but survived. At the time of the crimes, Eubanks' 5-year-old nephew was also in the house, but he was discovered uninjured. The prosecution claimed that Eubanks had killed her sons out of pure rage. This rage was supposedly a reaction to her resentment at their fathers and her boyfriend for choosing to break up with her. It was alleged that she wanted the dads to understand the sorrow of losing someone they had loved, and that she felt the urge to seek some kind of retribution for the failed relationships. The defense argued that the killings happened as a result of the defendant blacking out, and that because of this weakened mental state, she was not in control of her conduct. It was said that she turned into a robot and did what she believed would make her anguish go away after spending the day drinking, using prescription medicines, and dealing with recent domestic conflict and past heartbreak. Veronica Gonzales, 24 years on death row in the state of California. In July 1998, Gonzales received a death sentence for killing her niece Jenny. The youngster was dunked in a bathtub of boiling hot water until the skin peeled off her body. This caused her severe burns. Veronica and her husband Ivan did not call the authorities for several hours, even if they knew the injuries were very serious. The investigation that followed showed that the burning was merely the latest instance of what Associate Justice Carol Corrigan described as a sustained and diversified sequence of abuse, with testimony so detailed that it terrified jurors and investigators long after the trial ended. The 2-bedroom Chula Vista apartment where the couple lived had transformed into a house of horrors for the child. She was chained and hung from a bar inside the closet for hours at a time while being repeatedly beaten and burned with a blow dryer on her face and upper body. When her own mother left for a drug recovery center, she moved in with the methamphetamine-dependent couple who had 6 children of their own. The death penalty was also imposed on Ivan Gonzales. The two are the first married couple in California history to receive a death sentence. Before we go to the next one, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It helps me very much in the YouTube algorithm. Jessica Han, 9 years on death row in the state of California. The state of California sentenced Jessica Marie Han, formerly known as Jason Han, to death for the deaths of his infant son and daughter, as well as the attempted murder of another child. According to court records, Jason beat his 2-month-old son to death and his 10-month-old daughter as well. After Han failed to pay the rent, the body of the little girl was found in a storage container. Authorities would find a third baby displaying signs of abuse when they sought to detain Jessica Marie Han, or Jason Han, and his common-law wife, Chrissy Lynn Werns, the mother of the 2 children. Chrissy would be judged responsible for her daughter's death and given a 15-year prison term. Lorraine Hunter, 5 years on death row in the state of California. Hunter killed her husband Albert Thomas in 2009 so she could benefit from his life insurance policy. Her daughter, Brianna Hunter, 15 at the time, admitted to have helped Lorraine with the plan. On November 3, 2009, Thomas and his wife left their apartment and made their way to his big rig so that he could get a sweater for his stepdaughter Brianna. The 3 of them got into his truck, and as Lorraine and her daughter sat in the front seat, Thomas snuck into the back sleeper compartment to find the shirt. The victim was shot twice in the upper back as he knelt in the compartment by Lorraine Hunter after she produced a small caliber handgun that she had stolen from a member of her church. He was discovered dead in a kneeling position by sheriff's deputies. Hunter and her daughter managed to escape the scene with the assistance of a relative, and the case remained unsolved for 2 years until the same relative came clean to detectives after she was herself jailed for an unrelated crime. Cherry Lash Rhodes, 6 years on death row in the state of California. According to police accounts, Lash Rhodes started shooting at a Cedarville Rancheria office building. Cherry Rhodes seemed angry about her recent employment termination and ongoing fraud investigation. 4 people, including Rhodes's brother, niece, and nephew, were shot and killed by her. She tried to murder even more people, but she ran out of ammo. A witness was able to escape the office, according to the authorities, and ran covered in blood to the Alturas police station where they raised the alarm. Cherry Lash Rhodes was reportedly running with a knife in her hands outside the premises when police arrived, but she was immediately brought under control. Cherry was the chairwoman of the Cedarville Rancheria, and at the time of the murders, she and her son were also being evicted from a tribal house unit which added to her other stressors. Belinda Magana, 8 years on death row in the state of California. Magana and her boyfriend Naresh Nareen were charged for the death of her toddler son Malaki, who was scalded and then beaten for days before passing away from his injuries. As the pair was afraid of getting in trouble, they decided not to call the authorities, and instead Magana applied ointment. Because this did not help, the little boy was constantly crying and complaining, and both Magana and her partner hit the child multiple times for being so noisy. Magana claimed that the accident occurred when she and her other 4-year-old son were at the grocery store. Naresh, however, tried to blame the 4-year-old for turning on the heated water. According to experts, Malaki's death was caused by complications from the searing burn wounds as well as a blunt force trauma to the head. After driving to a party in Apple Valley, Belinda and Nareen buried the body the following day in San Bernardino County close to Little Creek. Valerie Dee Martin, 13 years on death row in the state of California. Martin is currently on death row after killing an elderly man. Police records state that Valerie Dee Martin, her 16-year-old son, his 14-year-old buddy, and an ex-offender intended to murder an elderly man who would be discovered dead in a car trunk with extensive burns and other injuries as well. It is alleged that Valerie Martin was a member of the white supremacy movement and was friends with Donovan Casey, Bradley Zoda, Christopher Kennedy, and Stuart Smith. Additionally, it is said that everyone in her immediate social circle used methamphetamine. Hello everyone, we are back with part 3 of Women on Death Row in the US. Let's see what they did to deserve this punishment. Maureen McDermott, 32 years on death row in the state of California. In order to obtain mortgage insurance on a home they jointly owned, McDermott, 37 years old, a former nurse, paid an orderly at the hospital where she worked to murder her male roommate, Stephen Eldridge, 27 years old. McDermott and Eldridge both purchased a $100,000 life insurance policy in December 1984, naming the other as beneficiary. Their bond weakened around the beginning of 1985. Eldridge expressed concern about the defendant's animals as well as the untidy state of the home, Eldridge's handling of McDermott's pets, and his intentions to sell his stake in the property upset McDermott. In February 1985, McDermott offered Jimmy Luna $50,000 to murder Eldridge, and he agreed. They decided to not use a gun so that they would not make a lot of noise and opted for stabbing instead. Thinking of ways to make sure the police would not look into it too much, they tried to make it look like Eldridge was gay. Luna requested Marvin Lee's assistance in the murder in March 1985. He offered Marvin $3,000 to watch his back and claimed that a group wanted someone killed. Marvin agreed. After a failed attempt to commit the crime while Eldridge managed to escape and take shelter at a neighbor's house, a fourth person joined the group. This was Marvin's brother Dondell. On the day of the murder, April 28, 1985, Luna, Marvin, and Dondell entered the home through the front bedroom window around 8:15 p.m. Eldridge had not yet arrived from a dinner appointment. In order to give the impression that Eldridge was killed when he returned home while McDermott was being robbed, she instructed Luna to slash her on the breast and inner thigh, which he did. Eldridge arrived home at about 10:40 p.m. Dondell met him inside the home with a firearm that belonged to McDermott but had been given to him by Luna. Eldridge was then taken down the hallway by Marvin Lee in a chokehold, where he was repeatedly stabbed by Luna until he collapsed to the ground. After that, Luna went back to Maureen McDermott's room, where he discovered her on the floor with a facial wound. After telling Luna that she had hit her head on the bedside table, Maureen McDermott asked if the wound looked convincing. Marvin heard McDermott yell from the rear bedroom not to forget to remove Eldridge's private parts as Luna and the two Lee brothers were ready to leave the residence. Luna did as he was told. Eldridge had received 44 stab wounds. 28 of the 44 stab wounds were lethal on their own. Luna was detained on May 23, 1985 for questioning, but he was freed after 72 hours. He was detained again on July 2, 1985 for the first-degree murder of Eldridge. Maureen McDermott was also detained in August 1985. Marvin Lee, who was being held for a separate crime, was given immunity in return for confessing to the murder of Eldridge and giving an accurate account. Dondell Lee received immunity in August 1986 while under the California Youth Authority's care. Luna entered into a plea deal in July 1989 when he admitted culpability to first-degree murder and promised to give an accurate account of his actions in Maureen McDermott's prosecution. Michelle Lyn Michaud, 20 years on death row in the state of California. Michaud and her partner, James Anthony DeVeggio, were found guilty of luring a 22-year-old lady into a van that had been specifically modified, torturing and killing her, and then leaving her body on a snowy slope. While Vanessa Leigh Sampson was traveling to her job at an insurance firm, the couple kidnapped her and abused her with 2 modified curling irons, and in the end they used the rope to strangle her. The victim's body was found 2 days later. The following day, DeVeggio and Michaud were detained in connection with an assault they had committed against a student at the Reno Community College 3 months previously. The two allegedly essayed a number of girls and young women over the course of their 13-month relationships in 1996 and 1997, according to the prosecution, who said the act was a part of a binge of total depravity. Michaud's own daughter and one of her friends, who were just 12 and 13 years old at the time, have been essayed by the pair in 1997. DeVeggio's 16-year-old daughter and her 17-year-old friend were also victims of essay committed by the two. Tanya Nelson, 13 years on death row in the state of California. After visiting a fortune teller in California, Tanya Jamie Nelson killed the woman and her daughter when her prediction did not come true. According to court records, Nelson was in California when she sought advice from a fortune teller about whether she should move her company from North Carolina to California. When she did, the move failed and Nelson became enraged. On April 22, 2005, the bodies of Ha Jade Smith, 52 years old, and Anita Niveau, a 23-year-old college student, were discovered in Mrs. Smith's Little Sagan residence. They had numerous stab wounds to their faces and necks which caused their death. Furthermore, both of them had cuts on their hands, indicating that they had made an effort to fend off the attackers. The reason why over a gallon of white paint had been splashed over their heads and hands was what confused the officers the most. A worried friend who had not heard from the victims called the Westminster Police Department on April 22nd. When the police arrived at the house, they saw what happened there. After buying plane tickets using the victims' credit cards, Nelson went on a shopping spree at South Coast Plaza in Orange County in May 2005. On May 30th of that year, she was taken into custody by Westminster police detectives at the Holiday Inn in Santa Ana. At the time of her arrest, she was in possession of the stolen credit cards, IDs, and expensive luggage of the victims. On June 1st, 2005, Nelson's accomplice Zamora was detained at his residence in North Carolina as well. Angelina Rodriguez, 19 years on death row in the state of California. Rodriguez was found guilty of killing her spouse with Gatorade laced with antifreeze. She apparently tried to kill him numerous times before with no result. A $250,000 life insurance coverage served as her motivation. She was found guilty of threatening a witness who she had told about her murderous plans for Frank. Rodriguez attempted to murder her husband only 3 months after they got married. The first time, according to the authorities, she fed him oleander plants that were poisonous, causing him to become ill. After that, she allegedly opened the gas cap on the dryer before departing to go see a friend in San Luis Obispo. Rodriguez ended up adding doses of green antifreeze to her husband's Gatorade. She called her insurance company a few hours after her husband passed away, but the representative informed her that she wouldn't get any money until the coroner determined the cause of death. Prosecutors said that she later called an investigator and claimed to have received an anonymous call claiming that her spouse had been poisoned with antifreeze. According to phone records, she never received such a call. Now, Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney Doug Sortino had the best take on this situation. Her relentlessness in her effort to pursue her goals was matched only by her stupidity. Additionally, the prosecution produced evidence that Rodriguez killed her child in 1993 by smashing a pacifier and forcing a piece of it down the infant's throat before filing a lawsuit against the pacifier's maker. She got over $400,000 compensation out of that trial. Rodriguez argued before the judge that she had not committed the crime and that Frank must have drunk the antifreeze on his own, but the defense attorney told the press after the hearing that he couldn't come up with much of a defense on the guilt-innocence question. Brooke Marie Rottiers, 12 years on death row in the state of California. Rottiers, her boyfriend Omar Tyree Hutchinson, and a female friend of theirs collaborated to lure two men aged 22 and 28 years old in a hotel room to rob them. Once in the room, at gunpoint, Rottiers instructed them to take their clothes off before tying them up and robbing them. Then, using women's lingerie and electrical cables, she battered and strangled them. The prosecution did not pursue the death penalty for the other two accomplices, as they participated by threatening the men and helped dispose of the bodies, but Rottiers was the one who committed the crimes. Mary Samuels, 28 years on death row in the state of California. In order to get rid of her 40-year-old husband, who she was divorcing, Samuels hired a hitman and she was found guilty. Additionally, she was found guilty of ordering the hitman's death. Mary Samuels killed Robert Samuels for money, including $240,000 in insurance, $70,000 from the Subway sandwich shop that they continue to jointly own despite going through a divorce, and $160,000 from the refinancing of the couple's home. She was dubbed the Green Widow by police and prosecutors after spending almost all of the money in less than a year. A male companion's photo from some time after the killings was produced as evidence and showed Samuels in bed, completely covered in cash. On December 8, 1988, Robert Samuels was shot in the back of the head at his Northridge home. According to the evidence, the alleged hitman bought a $25,000 life insurance policy the day after Samuels' body was discovered, listing Samuels' daughter Nicole as the beneficiary. The hitman was in fact engaged to Nicole Samuels. He was found dead, strangled, battered, and abandoned alongside the road in a remote Ventura County canyon 7 months later. Mary Samuels hired Paul Edwin Gall and Darrell Ray Edwards to commit the crime. Cathy Lynn Sarinana, 13 years on death row in the state of California. Sarinana and her husband Raul were found guilty of the deaths of Conrad Morales, 13 years old, and Ricky Morales, 11 years old. The boys were Raul's nephews and they were under the couple's care. Brothers Ricky and Conrad Morales were raised in a family and environment that made it almost impossible for them to succeed. They and their siblings were continuously being taken into protective custody by CPS, as their mother was not able to take care of them since she had an addiction. Conrad Morales, age 13, was transferred to live with his convicted felon uncle Raul and his wife Cathy Sarinana in Randall, Washington, when his mother, Rosa Morales, was given a jail sentence for narcotics offenses. Ricky, who was 10 years old, was transferred to live with his grandmother. Ricky did not get along with grandma and was consequently ordered to join his brother in Washington. Within a short period of time, the boy's sister, the police, and the neighborhood people discovered that Conrad and Ricky were both victims of physical and abuse. Conrad was enrolled in school even though Ricky never was. Conrad began concealing his wound with makeup according to his classmates and alleged that his uncle hit him. Ricky requested to be permitted to visit his aunt's house on Christmas morning by calling their residence. The family started to plan his trip, but sadly it never happened. On December 25, 2005, Ricky Morales was lying in a closet, dying of severe internal injuries. Raul Sarinana kicked and trashed Ricky for cleaning a bathroom too slowly, then went on to have his Christmas dinner. When Cathy decided to check on the boy hours later, she found him dead, so she called the police. A second sibling, who was just so happened to be absent, was subsequently reported to the police. When they got back to the Sarinana house, they discovered Conrad's body. It had been kept on the carport of their house, placed inside a trash can that was sealed with plastic and duct tape, then buried in concrete. Raul acknowledged that Conrad passed away on or around August 22, 2005, following a period of discipline. He admitted to the police that he invented the story of an older gay lover that possibly took the boy to cover up the murders, as the family started to show signs of suspicion. When the family relocated from Washington to California after this incident, they took the boy's body with them to the new house. Around this time is when they started debating whether Ricky needed to be killed also, because he had seen his brother's murder. Ricky's autopsy revealed evidence of significant mistreatment in the past, including old fractures, bruises, and what seemed to be cigarette burns all over his body. Witnesses claim to have seen Ricky being abused by both Raul and Cathy. According to reports, Cathy treated Ricky like a personal slave and demanded that he cleaned up after her and her kids. Police and neighbors said that while the Sarinanas and their 2 children did not exhibit any signs of malnutrition, the boys got thin. Raul and Cathy were each charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment with the additional accusation of torturing Ricky before his death. Cathy has said that she suffered from battered wife syndrome and that she was unaware of any abuse or maltreatment of either Ricky or Conrad. Despite the fact that Raul had admitted giving Ricky the beating that killed him, he maintains that the death was an accident and wasn't his doing. Both Raul and Cathy Sarinana were sentenced to death. Janeen Snyder, 16 years on death row in the state of California. When Michelle Caron was taken from her Las Vegas neighborhood in late March 2001, she was just 16 years old. Her naked body was found inside a horse trailer near Ruby Doo 2 weeks later. She had been essayed, bound, and shot by Janeen Snyder and Michael Thornton. At the trial, 2 teenage girls gave testimony about how Snyder lured them to a hotel where Thornton abused them. A 14-year-old girl who had been missing for more than 5 years was among the victims Snyder admitted to killing. Janeen Snyder, who lived with Thornton after experiencing issues with her own family, was a friend of Thornton's daughter. According to a testimony from Thornton's ex-wife, she overheard him discussing an incident about a little girl who was killed and her body was dissected before being thrown into the ocean. Snyder would make friends with females and bring them to Thornton's house or motels. According to evidence, Thornton and Snyder imprisoned the teenage girls against their will while abusing them and feeding them a constant diet of methamphetamine. If the girls complained to anyone or asked to go home, the pair would threaten to kill them. Due to a lack of evidence, Thornton and Snyder were never prosecuted with any crimes in relation to the earlier kidnappings. Manling Tsang Williams, 11 years on death row in the state of California. In 2007, Williams was found guilty of killing her husband in their Rowland Heights home and suffocating her 2 small children with a pillow. Her motivation was a narcissistic, selfish, and juvenile desire to begin a new life with another guy, away from the constraints of family life, according to the records. Manling Williams had reconnected with an old buddy on the internet in the months prior to the killings and had started dating him. The judge emphasized that if Manling Williams had chosen to just abandon the children, there were many family members who would have been able to take care of them. Neil Williams, her husband, was stabbed and sliced more than 97 times in the attack after Devon and Ian were strangled in their bunk bed, according to authorities. She mercilessly, brutally, and ruthlessly attacked her husband with a katana sword, they claimed. The court remarked that Neil begged for help in his closing moments. She attacked her spouse while wearing latex gloves. According to testimony, it takes 5 to 10 minutes for someone to suffocate to death. Therefore, Manling Williams had at least 5 minutes to think through what she was doing before killing her other kid the same way. The court claimed that after the killings, Manling Williams wrote a note saying that Neil Williams had killed the kids and himself. She threw away bloody garments and then went back home before yelling to the neighbors that someone had slain her family. Detectives interviewed her for hours after the deaths were found, while she pretended to be distraught, sorrowful, and confused. Tiffany Moss, 4 years on death row in the state of Georgia. In 2019, Moss was found guilty of starving and torturing to death her 10-year-old stepdaughter, Emani Moss, in 2013. Emani was violently abused by Moss for several years before her demise. She was starved by Moss starting 2013. Emani's absentee father did nothing to halt the abuse. She passed away on October 28, 2013 from malnutrition. At the time of her death, she weighed 32 pounds, which is around 15 kilograms, and this is the weight of a typical toddler. I will post a separate dedicated video about this case. There are too many details and pieces of info that have to be discussed so that a full picture is painted about what this little girl had to go through. This video will be posted on Monday, January 2nd, so for those of you who want to know more about this, I'll see you then. Hello everyone, this is part 4 of all the women that are currently on death row in the US. Let's see why they received the death penalty. Margaret Allen, 12 years on death row in the state of Florida. Allen was found guilty of killing and torturing Wenda Wright, her housekeeper. According to reports, she believed Wright had taken cash from her purse. Wright was strangled with a belt, according to the prosecution, after hours of torture. James Martin, Allen's roommate, and Quinton Allen, Allen's nephew, were both found guilty for their roles in assisting the woman in her attempt to bury the body in a shallow grave. Allen persuaded her 17-year-old nephew to use a belt to bind Wright's wrists and legs. She then beat and tortured Wright for more than 2 hours while pouring hairspray, rubbing alcohol, bleach, and nail paint remover on her face and down her throat. One of Allen's kids entered the room after hearing Wright's calls for help and saw what was happening. Allen forced the youngster to cover Wright's mouth with duct tape, but it wouldn't stay due to how moist her face was. Allen then decided to use a belt to choke Wright. Allen's nephew, Quentin, could not believe what he had done, so he went to the police and confessed to everything, and he even led the officers to the place Wright's remains were buried. The teenager was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and James Martin, who helped bury the body, got 5 years in prison, while Allen received the death penalty. Tina LaSonia Brown, 10 years on death row in the state of Florida. Brown was found guilty of using a crowbar to beat 19-year-old Audriana Zimmerman, shocking her with a stun gun, and setting her on fire in the family home. At her own trial, Brittany Miller, who was the daughter of Tina LaSonia Brown and only 16 years old, admitted to the judge that the original plan had been to just fight Zimmerman, but things spiraled out of control. It was said that the argument over a man was the cause of the attack. The group assaulted Zimmerman and used the stun gun on her before locking her in the trunk of a car, taking her to a wooded area, dousing her in gasoline, and lighting her on fire. Despite having 60% of her body covered in serious burns, Zimmerman was still able to rush to a nearby house and dial 911, but after 2 weeks she passed away. Only one of the 3 co-defendants in the case, Tina LaSonia Brown, was given the death penalty. Brittany, her daughter, received a life sentence for her involvement in the murder, and the third murderous conspirator was Heather Lee, a friend and neighbor of Miller and Tina LaSonia Brown. After entering a plea deal with the government, she was given a 25 years prison term. In her appeal, Tina LaSonia Brown made a strong case for Lee being the most accountable for Zimmerman's death. According to the appeal, Lee wanted to get revenge on Zimmerman for having an affair with her husband. All of the attack's weapons, including the gas can, crowbar, and stun gun, were claimed to have originated from Lee's home, and Lee later told friends that she had been responsible for setting Zimmerman on fire. Now, I don't know about you, but it sounds to me that even if Lee was the one who wanted Audriana dead, all 3 women participated in the crime and they were just as guilty. Brown's strategy maybe could have gotten Lee to be given a harsher punishment, but I don't believe her own sentence would have been changed anyways. Tiffany Cole, 15 years on death row in the state of Florida. Cole was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Florida couple Carol and Reggie Sumner in the first degree, along with 3 other men, Alan Wade, Bruce Nixon, and Cole's boyfriend Michael Jackson. No, not that Michael Jackson. Cole lived next door to the Sumners in South Carolina before they migrated to Florida. The crew robbed the Sumners while they were visiting them in Florida, then drove them into Georgia where they were buried alive. Cole withdrew money from an ATM using a couple's card, which made it possible to track down 3 of the group, who were later found in a South Carolina motel. After being apprehended, Nixon freely led police to the cemetery where the Sumners were buried. Although both victims had been able to escape their shackles, they only had time to embrace each other before passing away. Jackson and Wade were also given the death penalty. Nixon admitted to second-degree murder and was given a 45 years prison term after guiding authorities to the bodies and giving evidence against the other defendants. Robin Lee Rowe, 29 years on death row in the state of Idaho. Rowe killed her husband and 2 children when she set fire to their Ada County house. She is the only female on death row in Idaho. The killings happened on February 10, 1992, when a fire broke out on the first floor of the apartment where Rowe's husband, from which she was separated, and her 2 kids were residing. Her husband Randy and children Joshua, 10 years old, and Tabitha, 8 years old, were discovered dead when emergency personnel arrived at the scene of the burning building. Carbon monoxide poisoning caused the deaths of the 3 people. Fire investigators came to the conclusion that the smoke alarm had been switched off and that a liquid accelerant had been utilized to start the fire. Rowe was the primary suspect. There were many warning signs that pointed to Robin Rowe as the major suspect. One of Robin Rowe's 2 additional children reportedly passed away from sudden infant death syndrome. The other, a toddler boy, perished in a mystery fire in California. She and her son Keith were residing in a California cottage back in 1980. Her child was killed in a fire that started when his blankets caught fire from a portable heater. Rowe received $28,000 on the life insurance coverage after the boy passed away. Detectives discovered that Rowe had purchased over $250,000 worth of life insurance policy on her husband and kids. Virginia Susan Caudill, 23 years on death row in the state of Kentucky. Using a hammer, Virginia Caudill and Jonathan Goforth killed Lonita White after breaking into her home to find money for drugs. Her body was wrapped in a carpet and loaded into the trunk of her own car after they searched the house for valuables. The vehicle was taken to a deserted area, doused in gasoline, and set ablaze. Her death was attributed to severe head trauma, including strikes that caused portions of her skull to cave in, according to an autopsy. In the months following the killing, according to the prosecution, the 2 escaped to Florida and Mississippi. In New Orleans, Caudill was taken into custody by police 8 months after the murder. In 2010, Franklin Circuit Judge Philip Sheppard issued an injunction that prevents Kentucky from carrying out any executions. Sheppard approved the state's plan to carry out a lethal injection with 1 or 2 medicines. He decided that because of problems with how prisoners are treated and their mental condition evaluated in the days and weeks preceding an execution date, there cannot be any more executions. Since the capital penalty was reinstated in Kentucky in 1976, 3 people have been put to death. 2008 saw the execution of the last prisoner, Antoinette Frank, 27 years on death row in the state of Louisiana. In 1995, Antoinette Frank, then a rookie New Orleans police officer, tormented the family-run Kim Ann restaurant with Roger Lacaze, killing Officer Ronald Williams and the Wu siblings Ha and Kwong in the process. Author Chuck Hustmeyer, a former policeman himself, claims that Frank lied about her psychological and psychiatric state when she applied to be a cop in Louisiana in order to be appointed as a policewoman. Frank worked for the New Orleans Police Department for a little less than a year, despite being found to have lied in various areas of her application. She met her future boyfriend during a shooting. Roger Lacaze, a drug dealer, was seriously hurt and needed Frank's assistance that night as well as hospitalization. Frank fell in love with Lacaze, even if he was 18 years old when they met and she was 5 years older than him. It is reported that she even let him drive her police car. The pair decided to rob the Vietnamese restaurant on March 4, 1995. They both got caught and sentenced to death for the murders, but Lacaze was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2019. It is important to mention that the last execution of a woman in the state of Louisiana was carried out back in 1942, when Tony Joe Henry died in the electric chair. Lisa Jo Chamberlain, 16 years on death row in the state of Mississippi. Chamberlain and her boyfriend Roger Lee Gillett were charged with the murders of Linda Heinzelman and Heinzelman's boyfriend Vernon Hullett. The criminal couple was dealing drugs and fearing Linda would turn them into the police, they decided to get rid of her. Her partner Vernon, who was actually Gillett's cousin, was at the house as well. They used a hammer to beat him to death, causing the hammer's metal handle to bend and cave in his skull. Linda passed away after 2 days of agony. Her throat was cut and a plastic bag was pulled over her head to suffocate her. She was also beaten, stabbed, and essayed with an inert object. After all that, she was suffocated by a pillow, which caused her death. Gillett and Chamberlain dismembered the corpses with a hacksaw. They placed them in a chest freezer that had been put into Hullett's vehicle and then drove 15 hours, over 1,000 miles, while bringing 7 bags of evidence that they dumped at the Russell County landfill. Gillett and Chamberlain towed the truck into a shed at the Waldo farm owned by Gillett's family. According to court filings, at that point they plugged in the freezer and sealed it with a roll of gray duct tape. As people were witnessing Lisa Jo Chamberlain and Roger Gillett selling meth while driving around in the victim's car, they called the police, who opened an investigation and subsequently charged the two with murder. Blanche Taylor Moore, 32 years on death row in the state of North Carolina. Moore was found guilty of poisoning her boyfriend's food with arsenic, which led to his death. Moore is suspected of using the same method to kill 3 additional people and nearly kill a 4th. Police started looking into Moore in 1989 after her second husband, Dwight Moore, developed odd medical complaints. His condition was caused by arsenic poisoning, according to toxicology tests that were ordered by a doctor. He ingested a significant amount of poison over the course of a week, yet he managed to survive. The bodies of Moore's first husband, James Taylor, who passed away in 1973, and her ex-boyfriend, Raymond Reed, were requested to be excavated by the police after they developed suspicions about Moore. It was discovered that both males had been poisoned with arsenic. Moore's father passed away from symptoms resembling those of arsenic poisoning as well. Other alleged victims include a number of close friends and family members who unexpectedly passed away while displaying some symptoms of poisoning, although none of them had been excavated for additional analysis. Her mother-in-law, Isla Taylor, is another potential victim. According to rumors, Moore killed the men in her life because of a deep hatred for her drunken father, who compelled her to become a prostitute in order to support the family. Carlette Parker, 24 years on death row in the state of North Carolina. Alice Covington, who was 88 years old, was being cared for by Parker, a home health care provider. She is accused of taking about $44,000 from Covington's account. Parker is said to have killed her by drowning her in a bathtub when Covington confronted her. In addition to pepper spray on Covington's clothing and potential burns from a stun gun, the autopsy discovered bruises around her ankles and legs. Parker was in possession of a stun gun and pepper spray at the time of her arrest. After Covington went missing from Raleigh's luxury retirement community Springmore, police had reasons to believe there had been criminal play. Her 1993 Mercury Sable, which had been abandoned in a Morrisville field close to Davis Drive and Coppers Road, was later found to contain her body. The victim's face, neck, hands, upper arms, left wrists, upper left back, and upper part of both arms all had significant bruises, according to investigators. A laceration was present on the victim's left wrist as well as her lower left leg. Donna Roberts, 19 years on death row in the state of Ohio. Roberts was found guilty in connection with her ex-husband's Robert Fingerhut's death in 2001. Authorities claim that she encouraged her inmate boyfriend Nate Jackson to perpetrate the act. Robert Fingerhut, her late husband, and Roberts first met in 1980. In 1983, they got married and acquired a house in Miami, near Miami Gardens and Ives Estates. Later, the couple sold their house and relocated to Richmond, Virginia, for a year before returning to Roberts' birthplace of Youngstown, Ohio in 1993. Roberts was at her third marriage. According to court records, Donna Roberts hired an inmate to kill her husband, and after the offender was freed from jail, he carried out her instructions. Nate Jackson, the person who really drew the gun, informed investigators that Roberts had nothing to do with the murder, but correspondence from prison and phone calls revealed that she had indeed done what the prosecution claimed. Both received death sentences for plotting to have Fingerhut killed so that Roberts could receive more than $500,000 in life insurance payouts. Hello everyone, we are back with the last video from the series Women on Death Row. Let's see what they did to deserve the capital punishment. Brenda E Andrew, 18 years on death row in the state of Oklahoma. Robert Andrew, Brenda's husband, was shot twice with a 16-gauge shotgun, once by Brenda and once by her lover James Pavitt. Brenda and Rob were high school sweethearts and had 2 children together. She was a stay-at-home mom and she taught Sunday school. Everything was going great in their family. By the time she hit 40, she developed what some would call a middle-age crisis, and that's when she and her husband decided to separate. Rob visited in November 2001 to pick up the kids, and then he went into the garage to assist Brenda with lighting the furnace pilot. Brenda dialed 911 a short while later. She had been hurt and her spouse had been fatally shot. They were ambushed in their garage, she said to the authorities, by two males with guns. Brenda had been having an affair with James Pavitt, a fellow church member and insurance salesman, according to the investigation conducted by the police shortly after the incident. Rob had just purchased a $1 million life insurance policy from James. Additionally, according to friends, Rob had started to suspect something was off with his wife and the insurance salesman and was afraid for his life. Brenda and James were gone when the police arrived to arrest them. The pair was apprehended at the Mexican border 3 months later. Michelle Sue Tharp, 22 years on death row in the state of Pennsylvania. Tharp was convicted for the murder of her 7-year-old daughter. After being starved for an extensive period of time, Tasha was found dead in her bed by her mother. Tharp admitted during her testimony that she hesitated to seek help out of fear that social services would remove her other children. Instead, she and her boyfriend, Douglas Bittinger, drove Tasha's body through a convoluted, lengthy list of errands in his car before discarding it in the woods, draped in a sheet and packed in trash bags. Investigators soon discovered that Tasha's body had been hidden in a bush in the West Virginia woods by Tharp and her partner, who had made up a tale that the girl had become lost in the mall. On April 19, 1998, police detained Tharp a day after she reported Tasha missing from a Steubenville, Ohio mall. Tasha was born prematurely and was suffering from a wide range of conditions, including genetic anomalies, issues with her lungs, blood, glands, nervous system, and also digestive system. When she was born, she weighed 2 pounds 5 ounces, and when she passed away, she weighed less than 12 pounds. She had gone days without eating, according to an autopsy. According to witnesses, Tharp deprived Tasha of food for days or more at a time. They said that she kept her daughter in her room at night in order to stop her from rummaging around the kitchen for any crumbs that might be accessible. Tasha would eat from the trash can and from the pet food bowl. Additionally, they claimed that she treated her son and 2 other girls way better than she treated Tasha. Christa Pike, 27 years on death row in the state of Tennessee. She was found guilty of torturing and killing her classmate Colleen Slemmer when she was just 18 years old. Christa believed that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tadarill Shipp. On January 12, 1995, Pike, Shipp, Slemmer, and another friend of Pike's, Shadola Peterson, left their university dormitories to take a walk in the woods. Colleen was told that the purpose of this gathering was to reach an agreement and stop the constant fighting between them. What she didn't know was that both Pike and her boyfriend had developed an interest in the occult and satanic worship, and they had other intentions. Slammer was attacked by Pike and Shipp, while Peterson served as lookout. In later court testimony, it was stated that Slammer was taunted, beaten, and cut over the following 30 minutes, while also having a pentagram etched into her chest. Slammer was killed when Pike finally crushed her skull with a sizable piece of asphalt. A portion of Slammer's skull was retained by Pike, and the next day she started showing it around to other students. This is what led to the group's arrest less than 36 hours later. While Pike received the death penalty, her boyfriend got life in prison with the possibility of parole, and Peterson pled guilty, but she only got probation because she became an informant. It was discovered that Christa Pike had all 3 major common traits between murderers: a history of childhood abuse, a mental illness, and brain damage, most probably due to prenatal alcohol exposure. If the state carries out the punishment, she will be the first female to be executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. Kimberly Cargill, 10 years on death row in the state of Texas. Cargill was found guilty of the murder of Cherry Walker, her children's babysitter, in 2010. Walker was supposed to testify in Cargill's child custody hearing, according to prosecutors. Cargill was charged with felony injury to a child in relation to her 4-year-old son, whom Walker was babysitting at the time. When Cargill was arrested, she posted bond the next day. According to court records, Cherry was summoned to testify in Cargill's custody hearing on June 23rd, but Cargill asked her babysitter to refuse and said she would hide her out at her house. Walker had a seizure and stopped breathing while driving with Cargill. Cargill then drove Walker to a county road and doused her in lighter fluid before setting fire to her clothes. Out of 4 sons, 3 of them testified that their mother, Kimberly Cargill, frequently choked, kicked, and hit them. They told jurors that they often feared for their lives. They also said that she changed the locks on their bedroom doors so she could lock them inside. Her ex-husbands had unpleasant stories about her as well. She had them wrongly arrested for assault, and she even set the apartment of one husband on fire. Cargill's sisters said that she was the devil, and her own mother testified that at one point she heard her daughter say she wanted to kill her. Well, if not even her family backed her up when she most needed them, I would say she was a pretty horrible human being. Linda Carty, 21 years on death row in the state of Texas. She received a death sentence for the 2001 kidnapping and murder of 25-year-old Joanna Rodriguez in order to steal Rodriguez's infant son. Carty, who has both American and British citizenship, and 3 co-defendants, Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlos Williams, broke into a home on May 16, 2001, and took a 25-year-old woman and her infant son hostage. The victim was put in the trunk of a car after being hogtied with duct tape and having a bag taped over her head. She suffocated to death, but the baby, who was just 3 days old, was discovered unhurt. 2 other victims were beaten, bound with duct tape, and left inside the house. When it was determined that Carty had informed individuals that she was expecting a child while not looking pregnant, investigators immediately began to suspect her. Police learned from one of the apartment complex's residents that she sat with Carty in a car, noticed the child's car seat inside, and was informed by Carty that she was pregnant. The witness found this surprising because Carty didn't look pregnant at the time. Carty told her ex-husband that she was pregnant with his child and she would give birth the next day, which coincided with the day Rodriguez was kidnapped. Carty's mother also testified and said her daughter never mentioned anything about being pregnant to her, and she did not seem like she would be having a baby. Carty has always said that she had been framed by drug dealers because of her work as an informant. However, a former cellmate of hers testified that Carty asked her to write a letter in which a man seemed to explain that another 2 men were actually setting her up. This made Carty's claims look unlikely, as it was clear she was fabricating proof. She could be the first British woman to be put to death since Ruth Ellis in 1955, and the first Black British woman to be executed in more than a century. Brittany Holberg, 25 years on death row in the state of Texas. An 80-year-old white man was robbed and killed by Holberg inside his house. The guy was stabbed about 60 times and hit with a hammer. The weapons used were a fork, a butcher knife, a grapefruit knife, and a paring knife. A lamp pole had been shoved more than 5 inches down the victim's throat. Towery, the 80-year-old man, engaged Brittany Holberg, a prostitute, for a job. Towery was incorrectly depicted as an elderly guy who was innocent during the trial, according to defense attorney Catherine Brown Dodson, and Holberg acted in self-defense when Towery attacked her. According to testimony, the victim also struggled with drug use. Russell Towery, his son, testified that his father once drew a knife on him while having a rage. The victim's violent past with his ex-wife and kids was also shown as proof. This case sounds like it's a bit more in the gray area, as there is enough evidence to show that Holberg might have really acted in self-defense. Melissa Lucio, 14 years on death row in the state of Texas. Lucio has been convicted for the murder of her 2-year-old daughter Mariah. She claimed that the toddler had fallen down the stairs, but the medical exam also showed she had many bruises. She was missing hair that had been pulled by the roots. She had a broken arm that was in the early stages of healing, and there were bite marks on her back as well. While the fall supposedly happened 2 days prior, the paramedics were only called when Mariah was found not breathing and unresponsive. The autopsy also revealed she had bruising of the spinal cord, the lungs, and the kidneys. Lucio had 9 other children, and she was expecting twins at the time of her conviction, babies that she had to give up for adoption after being incarcerated. Her other living children backed up the false story and said their mother was not the person she was portrayed to be. One of her boys said he actually saw Mariah fall down the stairs, and he was adamant about the fact that nobody told him that she fell. He saw that with his own eyes. Melissa Lucio is part of the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project is an organization that helps investigate and re-examine evidence from trials that have a chance to have ended with a wrongful conviction. For example, they helped free Malcolm Alexander, who spent 38 years in a prison for a crime he did not commit. If you want to know more about that case, I posted a video about it. You can go watch it and draw your own conclusions. Taylor Rene Parker, 2 months on death row in the state of Texas. Parker was found guilty of killing Reagan Simmons Hancock, who was pregnant, and abducting her unborn daughter Braxlyn Sage Hancock, who later died. Prior to cutting open Simmons Hancock's womb to abduct the unborn child, Parker stabbed the victim more than 100 times at the victim's home. Taylor Parker cut the victim's abdomen hip to hip while she was still alive. She was caught at a traffic stop soon after leaving the crime scene, and she told police officers that she gave birth on the side of the road. On the day of the murder, investigators testified that she had studied a number of videos on giving birth and caring for infants, including one on the medical examination of a baby delivered at 35 weeks. Parker had lied about being pregnant to her spouse and to others, and she had even thrown a gender reveal party. After undergoing a hysterectomy, she was unable to conceive. This case seems unreal, and unfortunately, it looks like there have been several such instances. I have a video up about the story of Savannah Greywind. It is truly heartbreaking to see how cruel some people can be. Darlie Routier, 26 years on death row in the state of Texas. Routier was found guilty of stabbing and murdering her 2 young sons, Damon, 5 years old, and Devon, 6 years old. Devon and Damon were killed by a huge kitchen knife, and Routier herself was stabbed in the arm and throat. Routier reported to the police that an unidentified intruder was responsible for the incident. The defense argued that there was no reason Routier would have killed her children, and that the case lacked a motive, a confession, or any witnesses. During the trial, the prosecution claimed that Routier's injuries were self-inflicted, that the crime scene had been staged, and that she killed her sons due to the family's financial difficulties. There are DNA tests pending results, as Routier has always maintained her innocence. Erica Yvonne Sheppard, 28 years on death row in the state of Texas. Sheppard was found guilty of killing Marilyn Meager during a robbery. Marilyn Meager was taking clothing from her automobile into her apartment on June 13, 1993, when Erica Sheppard and James Dickerson decided to steal her of her car. While Meager begged for her life, the couple tackled her inside her apartment and repeatedly sliced her throat with knives. She was then pounded in the head with a 10-pound statue after having her head covered in a plastic bag. In March 1995, Sheppard received a death penalty verdict. James Dickerson also received the capital punishment, but he died from AIDS on death row before the execution could be carried out. Both Sheppard and Dickerson were just 19 years old at the time of the crime, and Erica was already a mother of 3 children. She said that she was present when the crime took place and that she was guilty of not doing anything to stop it, but claims she was not the one to actually commit the murder. With this, my friends, we finished the series about all the women currently on death row in America.